was the time of the year when the days are short, the nights are long, and the weather is predictably unpredictable. I'll never forget how eerily gray and gloomy the whole day had been, and calm, unnervingly calm. Not even a breeze was stirring the leafless branches. It was so cold that day, when the air hit your face, it felt like getting slapped with a brick of ice. A nasty, nasty winter day that made it into the state record books. But as a veteran police officer, I remember the days for reasons aside from the cold. It was towards the end of my shift. The sun was near to setting, but I only knew that because of the time. It seemed like that whole week, the sun had been hiding and non-existent. The gray sky faded into a deeper gray, and I knew it would soon be fading into an empty darkness. Wherever the sun had gone, it had taken the moon and stars with it. I was thankful my shift was almost done and was praying nothing would happen in this last hour. But of course, that is not how Murphy's Law operates. I was sitting in my cruiser, alone since my partner was out with the flu, and parked in the local grocery store's front lot. The grocery store had been closed for about an hour like all the other businesses around had been. Most of them had been closing a little early because of the cold that day. The weatherman on TV was claiming a massive snowstorm was coming in and that temperatures would continue to drop. I was definitely looking forward to getting off, getting home, and getting into my nice warm house. Anyway, I was sitting there thinking about all this when a black hatchback came flying up the road, coming from city streets and heading out of town towards the highway. The posted speed limit was just 35. I clocked this guy at almost 60. I immediately flipped on my lights and sirens and pulled out to pursue the hatchback. He obviously saw or heard me behind him because it did not take long for his taillights to light up as he slowed down and pulled over just before the "Come Back Soon" sign that marks the city's northern limits. I left my lights on but flipped off the sirens and called into dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Officer. I have an 1195 in progress. Vehicle is a black hatchback. License plate." A routine traffic stop, and the guy stopped quickly before noticing me. I didn't feel any backup would be necessary, but I knew that's what dispatch would be asking. "Officer, do you need backup?" I could hear keys clanking as dispatch used the keyboard in front of them to run a more in-depth check on the license plate number I provided. "Negative, but we'll update if something changes." I clicked my radio back into place and put my hat on my head and my fleece-lined leather gloves on my hands. I grabbed the door handle and pushed the door open to step into the near-Arctic temperatures. The cold was shocking and distracting. My face was the only exposed skin, and still, I could feel the cold throughout my body. For the first time all day, a gust of frigid wind blew. It felt as though it was slicing me to pieces. I shivered hard and gripped my door to close it. I know my passenger door was not open, but I heard a car door that was not the one beneath my hand gently shut somewhere nearby. I double-checked and the driver of the black hatchback had not gotten out of his vehicle. He was still sitting in his car and appeared to be rummaging in his glove box. I could see his silhouette that one hand was gripping the top of the steering wheel as he leaned across the console and was digging in his glove box. I had not called for backup, but if someone was in the vicinity, they might have come anyway. I turned to check behind my cruiser and saw nothing but empty roads and the glow of streetlights. I had almost convinced myself I was hearing things when I noticed a person in the front passenger seat of my cruiser. Suddenly, my full attention was on my passenger seat, with nowhere else to go and the cold really starting to hurt. I slid back into the driver's seat and shut my door. The woman sitting in the seat was an officer, but something was off. I felt like I recognized her, like seeing someone you know their name right on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't place them. Her uniform didn't seem quite right either, as if seeing a strange police officer in my car wasn't strange enough. I was analyzing why her uniform didn't seem right. She was calm as she sat there, her breathing barely perceptible. Her hair was strawberry blonde, and she had a spattering of freckles across her pale nose. I hadn't been able to say a word at this point, and realized I was just staring at her. She finally turned and looked straight in my face, with her bottle green eyes, and said, "He has a gun by the seat." She spoke with a startling conviction. She never broke the eye contact she had established with me. Before I could verbally acknowledge her statement or even ask her how she knew for certain the driver had a gun, she began to fade. I sat confused, but still staring as she seemed to repeat herself one last time. "He has a gun by the seat." And she was gone. I don't know how much time passed between hearing the phantom car door shut and the female officer vanishing, but the hatchback suddenly came back into my mind. I realized I was staring at my own reflection in the passenger door window. I looked like a ghost. I shook off the encounter with the policewoman. It wasn't my imagination. She had been there, but I had to follow through with this traffic stop before the hatchback decided he was tired of waiting. My stomach was in a tight knot as I got out of my vehicle. The female officer's voice still lingered in my mind. I could almost hear her as plainly as if she was walking beside me. I noticed the driver had his hands resting in his lap. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew something was off about this seemingly routine traffic stop. Her warning more than heeded, I approached the hatchback's driver's side. The window was still up, which did not concern me at first, given the extreme cold. I knocked gently on the glass with the intent of alerting the man to my presence. He was looking down at his hands as he rested them palm up on his thighs. From his profile, I could see his brow was knit in an expression of deep contemplation. I tried to tap on the window again, this time with my flashlight. Maybe the motion of the light beam would also catch his eye. He took a deep breath and finally put his right hand on the steering wheel as he rolled the windows down with his left. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" he asked in a slightly slurred voice. I could smell the whiskey as I stood 2 feet from the window. I wasn't sure if it came from him physically or from one of the open bottles I could see inside his car. "Well, sir, I clocked you going 58 in a 35. Do you have your license and registration?" The cold was biting through my layers, chomping away at my patience as this man took his dear sweet time rummaging through his glove box. In the back of my mind, I remembered I had already seen him digging in his glove box this evening. He should have had it out and ready. He has a gun next to his seat. Immediately, I began to feel uncomfortable. The knot in my stomach grew near unbearable. Eventually, he handed me what I asked for. "Thank you. Stay right here, and I'll be right back with this." He only nodded and hung his head again. I walked back to my cruiser backward and gave the appearance of looking at his paperwork. I was focused on the driver, though. What was he doing, and where were his hands? For the first time being, he was just sitting there, probably staring at his hands. I was grateful for the warmth of my cruiser as I slid into the driver's seat and contacted dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Officer, requesting further information for the driver with the 1195. Once they were ready, I gave them the name and last known address of the man, as well as the other information they asked for from me. I was nervous to find out this guy had a warrant out for his arrest. Dispatch was sending backup. Any time an arrest is made, 2 officers at the very least are meant to be present. I filled out a ticket for the 55-year-old man in the hatchback. My backup arrived in just a few minutes, lights and sirens off as they approached my location. We did not want to overwhelm him and cause him to do something rash. When the officer who came as backup got out of his cruiser, I also got out of mine and told him I had a feeling this guy had the potential to become hostile. We agreed he would approach the passenger side and I would continue speaking with the driver. Together, we went up to the hatchback. He had rolled his window back up, so I tapped on it gently with my flashlight again. He rolled down the window. This time, it looked as though he was trying to think himself sober and had gotten himself angry. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to please turn off your vehicle and step out of your car." He was visibly starting to shake, and his face was beginning to turn red with rage. My backup noticed this at the same time I did, and he drew his weapon as a precautionary measure, but kept it pointed towards the ground. "Sir, please step out of your vehicle." I repeated calmly but firmly. His eyes darted to the right towards the other officer and back to his hands. I sensed defeat in him. It was simply too cold to attempt anything other than cooperation. "Open the door. Put your hands on your head and keep them there as you step out of the car, please." He took his sweet time, but he did follow the instructions I gave him. We were able to make the arrest with no incidents. More backup and a tow truck came. The additional backup took possession of the car and took it to impound. I took the driver, a wanted man, down to the jail into processing. Once he was officially signed over and out of my responsibility, I clocked out and went home to my nice warm house. The drive home was quiet. The wind had died again. The eerie silence was back. I thought of the policewoman who had sat in the passenger seat of my cruiser earlier that evening. Something about her was familiar, but even after relaxing at home and getting into bed, I still couldn't place her. The next day, the sun had finally made an appearance. It shone brightly in a cloudless sky. Old snow was melting and making the earth wet and almost green. A breeze had begun to blow gently, and it felt like life had returned to the area. I had such a sense of relief and peace flood over me as I drove to work that morning. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it could not have simply been the change of weather. But at the time, that is exactly what I thought it was, a sunny mood to match the sunny weather. The woman who works the desk at the station handed me the paperwork I needed to finish up, sign, and turn in. On top was also a copy of an old case file from a couple of counties over. I shuffled it to the bottom of my paperwork and decided to start with the report regarding the arrest I made last night. Included in the paperwork was an inventory list of all the items found in his car and a diagram of a generic car marking where each item had been found. My eyes were instantly drawn to a small red circle with a number 1 written inside of it on the diagram. It was right next to the driver's seat. The corresponding number on the inventory list listed this item as a 9mm pistol that had been loaded with 4 rounds. My mind began to race as the woman's voice echoed in my memory. "He has a gun next to the seat." Her warning had potentially saved my life. Aside from the many bottles of alcohol and other beverages in the car, there was not much else of note. I finished the paperwork in relation to the car, signed it, and moved on to the next report. This was the arresting report that I had started last night. Included with my own words was the warrant for his arrest for a couple of counties over. According to the warrant, he had shot and killed an officer during a routine traffic stop in which he had been pulled over for a busted taillight. My mind was racing as I thought about the cold case I had been reading along with these reports. I quickly grabbed the case from the bottom of the stack of paperwork and flipped it open to the first page. There she was. The woman, the officer who had been sitting in the passenger seat of my cruiser. It was her picture from the day she must have graduated from the academy. I saw her name and immediately recognized it as the police officer the speeding driver had killed 20 years ago. Justice had never been served, but it would be now. Her murder happened a few counties over. I'll never understand how she wound up in my cruiser or why, but I do know I will never doubt the fact that her solemn warning saved my life. While on duty one night when I was a young policeman, I was instructed to get to a residence for a 5150. I knew that a 5150 meant someone at the residence was having some sort of psychiatric issue and needed assistance. I quickly turned the flashing lights and the siren and headed to the residence. When I arrived, I began quickly walking up the sidewalk when an elderly woman stepped out of the door. She appeared frantic and filled with worry and concern. I asked her who she was, and she stated that she was the owner of the residence. After telling the woman my name, she began to tell me about her son. She stated that he was addicted to drugs and must have just used too much or some bad drug. I could tell she was trying to stay calm, but she was having a difficult time. I had to quickly assess the situation to make sure that she was not the one that needed help. I took my time to calm her down and gently asked her to tell me again what was happening. She again stated that her son was on some type of drugs and seemed to be seeing things. Nothing she tried was helping to convince him that he was not seeing what he claimed. She explained to me that each time her son tried to walk into his own room, he could see that there was an old man hanging from the ceiling. The man is wearing an old military uniform from World War II. I went over and sat down with the younger man and asked him to tell me what was happening. He looked me in the face and said, "I cannot go into my room. There's an old man wearing a World War II uniform that's hanging from my ceiling." I could tell the man was higher than a kite, but that did not mean he was crazy. I thought quickly how the mother could be correct. It may be a bad drug. I watched him closely and listened to how he was talking. "The guy who actually lives here told me I should not go into the room." I looked quickly at his mom. She shrugged her shoulders and told me, "It's just the two of us who live here. My husband has passed on." I looked back at the son, who was visibly shaken. I could not help but begin to believe him as he said, "The spirit who lives here told me not to enter my bedroom. He told me that it is his father hanging from the ceiling." It was at this time that I stood up and walked towards the room. I hesitated before I opened the door, unsure of what I would see when I did open it. As I entered, I slowly looked around the room, at the ceiling, behind the doors, and even in the closet. I did not see what the young man was seeing. Just then, I heard a voice that scared the crap out of me. I was not expecting to hear anyone as I entered the room, and since there was no one in the room other than me, I admit I did jump. The voice I heard belonged to another police officer, a veteran. I relaxed when I realized who was there with me. The officer told me that he had heard the address over the radio. He knew he had to come. He had recalled how years ago, when he was just starting his career in law enforcement, he had been ordered to go to a call at this same residence. The officer asked me to tell him what I knew so far, so I did. The owner of the home called in for help with her son. He's a drug user, but she's concerned that it was a drug laced with something that should not be there, and he was seeing things. Upon talking to the son, this is what he told me. "I was told by the spirit who lives in the room that I could not enter. The spirit told me that it is his father hanging from the noose." At this time, both the older police officer and I looked around the ceiling again, as he put his arm on my shoulder and stated, "When I came on a similar call to this residence many years ago, it was because an elderly gentleman had dressed in his World War II uniform and proceeded to hang himself with a noose from the ceiling. This occurred in the same room here." I did think that maybe this veteran officer was just giving me a hard time, trying to scare me, but I knew him well enough to know that a poker face was not something he was good at. I looked him in the eyes and opened my mouth to say something. He squeezed my shoulder, and I knew then by the look in his eyes that he was telling me the truth. But how could this be? No one was seeing the old man hanging. No noose. No World War II uniform. Nothing. Having no knowledge of this case from years ago, I could only believe what he said to be the truth. Is it possible that there were spirits in this home? In that room? The past case was certainly a sad one. But had the drugs affected the owner's son to the point of turning a memory into an actual event that only he could see? Was there maybe some otherworldly presence at work here? This would be a case to remember throughout his whole career. It was unexplainable to me and left me wondering how I was going to fill out the paperwork and log this into the system. What I can tell you is that I have no idea if there's any type of help that can be given to the son. Maybe he was on drugs due to what he was seeing.